We read in Revelation that a third of the angels fell from heaven to follow Satan. An unbeliever might be justified to ask, if God is so loving and heaven so great, how is this possible? This is not an insignificant number. Also, could a fallen angel repent? Can they still fall today, or has their free will been voided? Are more angels being created by God? There's a few questions there.
Yeah, right. Well, I have no reason to believe more angels are being created by God. I guess more could be, but I have no reason to believe that. We're just going to have to let that lie because there's no information about it. The question was, if can angels now fall? I'm kind of going backwards here. Has their free will been voided? I'm not entirely clear on that myself. Now, and this is always part of the problem, Amy, when the word free will comes up, a lot depends on what you mean by free will. And what is characteristically presumed is that they have the ability to sin and fall, and that their natures are such that this makes it possible. Certainly from the beginning that was the case, because a third of the host, the heavenly host, did choose to rebel against God. And as far as we can tell, well, that's too equivocal. There is no salvation plan for angels. Duh. And everything that is ever said about fallen angels is these are things that are they presume their eternal damnation. Let's just put it that way. Some of them are even locked up for final judgment. And there's no sense that, maybe in prison, their spiritual prison, they will repent. There's nothing like that. And, of course, for them to be rescued, they would have to be rescued in virtue of a sacrifice to pay for their crimes against God. And Jesus, the Word, became a man to rescue humans as a kinship redeemer. And so there is no intimation that the Holy Spirit, that's the only person left, is going to take on some kind of demonic nature or angelic nature than to sacrifice himself to redeem the demons that are fallen. It's just, that's not part of the plan. I think it's pretty safe to say that there is no grace offered to fallen angels. And this makes clear that grace is not required. And this is where I'm going to disagree, at least with the way I understand Bill Craig's view. Bill Craig says that justice doesn't require grace, but love does. In other words, it's God's loving nature that requires that he give everyone an equal chance at salvation so that the most can be saved. And this is why he's an Arminian, one of the reasons, not a Calvinist, because on the Reformed view, God selects who he's going to save and lets the rest of them do their own thing to perdition and to judgment. So, to me, and I had a discussion with somebody just within the last 2 days on this, God's love does not require grace. It is an expression of his love when he does grace, but grace is freely given as he wills, not as he's required. That's why it's called grace. It's not only not based on the merit of the individual that receives it, it is also not required by God. Rather, it was the result, as Paul says in Ephesians 1, of the kind intention of his will. In other words, it was a decision he made. It wasn't something that flows naturally because he's a loving God. Grace is, as philosophers would put it, a supererogatory act. That means an act which is not obligatory. It is not morally obligatory, but it is praiseworthy when done. Think of heroism. Some bystander runs into a burning building to save a child. Okay, if that bystander didn't run into a burning building, no one would have held that against them. They are not morally obliged to do that. But that they did, that they went above and beyond the call of duty, so to speak, then the act becomes praiseworthy. In the same sense, God has no obligation, even from the fact that he's loving, to rescue fallen humanity. He did not, though he was loving, rescue the fallen angels, as far as we could tell. There's no evidence of that, okay? But he does so out of an overflowing of his love as a supererogatory act, as an act of heroism, so to speak, above and beyond what's required, okay? So if it turns out then that God decides to additionally act to rescue those angels, or to do something on behalf of those angels that did not rebel, and that is to fix their characters in immutable goodness, like I think we will experience when we go to heaven, immutable goodness. Our natures will be so changed that we will not be capable of sinning. And a lot of people think that's true of the angels, although, to be honest, I'm not exactly sure what the rationale is on that. I'd like to see that kind of spelled out for me. But that's the position of a lot, that after the fall, God changed the angels. And so in that sense, is their free will voided? No, their free will, in one sense, is not voided. They are not free to sin in the same way that God is not free to sin, because there is no sin in their nature. It's not anything they would freely choose. What they end up freely choosing are those things totally consistent with a morally perfect nature, just like God. That's a good thing, not a bad thing. That's a good kind of freedom, the freedom to do the right thing all the time and not be oppressed by doing the wrong things. Okay? So, again, this is where the word freedom is bandied about without clarity about it. But I think that covers the basis of Gary's question. Maybe you have some things to add to that, Amy.
The first question was, if God is so loving and heaven so great, how is it possible that they fell? Why did they fall if God was so loving and heaven was so great?
Okay, I would like, if Gary were here, I would like Gary to explain to me how God's perfect love and perfection in the greatness of heaven makes it impossible for some creatures who have the capability of exercising their will against God, and that certainly was the case then, and with Adam, how they could do that. Why would he think that wouldn't be possible? And it suggests that there is a predetermined element in being in a perfect environment. If you are in a perfectly loving environment where everything is just so and just right and just wonderful, then that will predetermine your behavior so that you'll never rebel against it. But why would that's a kind of predetermination? That's almost that's at least arguably a lack of freedom that's there. So why would anybody think that being in a perfect environment wouldn't incite somebody to do wrong, or wouldn't make it possible? Not, incite isn't the right word, obviously. It would not make it possible for them to do wrong. They just did, because this is the nature of freedom, of the kind of freedom of the will that the angels had and Adam had. And the way the ancients would say it, and this is regard to Adam, posse non peccari, posse peccari. In other words, for Adam, it was possible not to sin and possible to sin. Once he fell, human beings is non-posse, non peccari. That means it's not possible for humans not to sin. But in the resurrection, it'll be non-posse peccari, not possible to sin. And so that's kind of the way it's laid out here. Yes, could have gone this way or could have gone that way prior to the angelic fall, and for angels, and prior to human falls, the human fall for humans. After the fall, in the case of humans, that changed everything. And the promise of the resurrection is that there's going to be actually a better state of affairs. In heaven, it won't be posse peccari, posse non peccari. Some people believe that. Who's our friend over at Talbot who wrote the book on evil? Clay Jones. I mean, he thinks, it's possible. Yeah, he thinks it's possible we will sin. We can sin, but we won't because we're really smart. And I don't, I hope that's not the case because I don't know that I'm going to be that smart when I get into heaven if I have the opportunity to sin. But that's just a difference of opinion. I think it will not be possible for us to sin in heaven. And so that's the way it lays out from my perspective, at least, on that question.
I agree with you, Greg. I don't think the problem with sinning is intelligence. I think it's a problem of our nature and who we are. But the one difficulty about answering any question about angels is that we have very little information. So I think a lot of this we'll find out ultimately, but I think you've given some good guesses there, Greg.
Thanks, Amy.